Well, let me welcome everyone and thank you for joining us in this panel hosted by the Vanderbilt Project on Unity and the American Democracy, along with the Global Action Platform. Our program today is Getting Things Done at the Municipal Level. We're tackling the issues of why local governments often appear. Certainly the people on this particular panel believe that local governments have the ability to work more efficiently, especially compared with state and federal governments on many occasions. We plan to explore why that appears and why local governments have for so long appeared to be insulated, if not immune, from much of the polarization that has been plaguing national and other politics, and perhaps, we hope, pass along some lessons, not only to those folks who are interested in these issues across the country at the local level, but also at other levels of government. I am Bill Purcell. I'm the former mayor of Nashville from 1999 until 2007. I served for 10 years in the Tennessee House of Representatives. Before that, the last 6 as majority leader. I currently serve as an adjunct professor of public policy studies at Vanderbilt University and am counsel here at Frost Brown Todd LLC, a law firm in Nashville. More importantly, we have 2 extraordinarily, I think, ideal panelists for this conversation this morning. Mayor David Holt took office on April the 10th, 2018 as Oklahoma City's 36th mayor. He was elected with 78.5% of the vote in his first election. I am in awe of that. It was the largest vote percentage achieved by a non-incumbent candidate for mayor since 1947. And it made Mayor Holt the youngest mayor of Oklahoma City in the last century. He's the first Native American mayor of Oklahoma City. And at the time of his election, he was the youngest mayor of a U.S. city with more than 500,000 residents. He is much older now, but we will hear more about those years and that mileage in the conversation we're about to have. Mitch Weiss joins us as well. He is the Richard L. Menschel Professor of Management Practice at the Harvard Business School. He created and teaches the school's course on public entrepreneurship, on public leaders and private entrepreneurs who make a difference in the world. He also teaches the entrepreneurial manager in the first year of the MBA program there. Prior to this, and for me, and I think our purposes today, most importantly, he was chief of staff and to Mayor Tom Menino, the longest serving mayor of Boston, but more importantly, a mayor's mayor, a mayor who was a mentor to me and to all the mayors who served during his time and whose legacy continues to inspire. In that role, he helped to shape the new urban mechanics, which was Boston's municipal innovation strategy, and make it a model, truthfully, for my city and cities all across the country. He's the author of the recently published book from the Harvard Business Review, We, the Possibility, published just this year. You'll see a very large pile of them there over his right shoulder. All of them are available from him directly or also from your usual booksellers, wherever they may be, as well as online. To begin this conversation, I would tell you that more than a century ago, in 1907, in fact, at the Economic Club of Boston, the former mayor of Nashville, James Head, debated the president of Harvard, Charles Eliot. And the subject was municipal government and the future of municipal government. And the then president of Harvard, President Eliot, suggested, and this is from the New York Times story of January 12th, 1907, President Eliot suggested, and I'm quoting now, that the idea of the sovereignty of the people in municipal governments was about as archaic as the granting by Spain to the United States of the sovereignty of the Philippine Islands for a consideration of $20 million. And you can't speak of anything more absurd than that. Well, rather than spending any time dwelling on President Eliot's worldview, or the subject of that purchase now more than 100 years ago, we also know that today, according to a recent paper published by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, as well as other data from Pew and others, Americans think of municipal government today as the, and I quote now from the Academy, locus of democracy that serves them best, and that local communities are their preferred vehicles of civic engagement. What is it, do you think, that local governments are doing in this country to make their citizens feel that way? Mayor Holt?
Well, a lot of different thoughts. Part of it comes from the way we elect our municipal officials for the most part across the country. And part of it comes from the outcomes that we simply have to achieve at the local level that maybe we don't have we have the luxury of ignoring at other levels of government. So let me just real quickly dive into both of those concepts. The first is, in most cities, this is not exclusively true, but in most cities, mayors and council members are elected on a nonpartisan basis and do not have to go through a closed partisan primary. And this, to me, is the root of all dysfunctionality in American government. The fact that a candidate typically for most other races has to face a group of voters that is a subset of the electorate, and it is typically a subset of the electorate that has very different views than the broad electorate. And so if you have to go face today, for example, a group of voters that are 100% Trump voters, or a group of voters that are 100% Biden or Democratic voters, obviously it determines the kind of candidate you are, and it determines the kind of governance you're likely to provide, knowing that at the other end of this, you're going to have to face that same group of voters again. Mayors and council members in most cities know that we get to face all the voters. We don't have to face a subset of the voters. And it just totally changes the way that we approach the job, because we can build a coalition of normal, reasonable people that happen to be registered Republican and happen to be registered Democratic. And I find in Oklahoma City that 70% in the middle has kind of been our sweet spot for 20 or 30 years, not just in my election, but you mentioned my election. And there's no doubt that in a city that voted for Biden probably by about 5 points and is really kind of just split down the middle on those federal issues, that for 78% of people to vote for the same mayoral candidate means a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats voted for the same person that day. And that doesn't happen very often. So that's the first thing that I think gives people a sense that this is a government that's responsive to them, because more people are getting most of what they want. Whereas, now it's like in the other levels, it's kind of all or nothing, So that's one thing. I think the other thing is, at our level of government, you can't run it for entertainment purposes like they do at state and federal levels, and especially at the federal levels. I mean, politics in Washington is really just almost completely a game now, and it is almost completely geared towards Twitter likes and, cable TV ratings, and it's like professional wrestling. But at the local level of government, like our city won't function if we all treated it that way. And I'm sure we'll get into this later on in the conversation. More and more that's creeping down, and we've got to resist that. But right now, this is still the place where things have to get done, because really we have no choice, because we pick up your trash, we bring you water, we provide police and fire protection, we provide quality of life. We can't treat this like a game and accept that nothing's going to happen while we're having all our fun press conferences and sending out our hilarious tweets. We cannot accept that as a victory. We have to actually achieve accomplishments and ultimately pass things and build coalitions in our council that might be Republicans, might be Democrats. We just have no choice. So I think those are a couple of the reasons that come to mind when I hear that citizens largely have more trust in their local government. It's about how we elect people, and it's ultimately about the outcomes that we simply have no choice but to achieve at the local level.
Mitch, I think our friend Tom Menino would agree. I remember very well asking him in a study group at Harvard at the Institute of Politics on one occasion, well, why haven't you ever run for governor? And he said, why would I want to be governor? I like to do things. I like to get things done. I have no interest in being governor. What do you think about what Mayor Holt had to say?
I think Mayor Holt is right on all counts. I think it's true what he said and what you just said, that having to get the work done means doing the work differently. I think that's true. And it's not a game. And it's about getting the streets swept and the snow in our city plowed and kids educated and fed if need be. And I think it is true. It's that needing to get the work done changes how the work gets done. I think it's also true what Mayor Holt said about having to answer to all the people. And I think you take that the things he said about running for office and you carry them all the way right through serving in office. I think the reason that people at the local level may feel more empowered is because they've been more empowered. Because mayors then take that campaigning ethos of we need to work with everybody and take it into governing. I mean, I think of one of Mayor Holt's colleagues up in Minnesota, in St. Paul, Melvin Carter, who, when he gets inaugurated for his first term, first of all, people started clapping laudably, as they should, and he says, "Don't clap if you're not going to help. You know, don't clap if you're not going to help." And he says, "We have a city that works for everybody when we all work. When we all work together, we all work for it." And so, the mayors that are doing best, I think, are in making citizens feel empowered, are actually empowering citizens. So you take a Mayor Carter, and when he goes out to try to reform public safety, he talks about how we're going to do this with the community. When he goes out to do his budgeting, he stops in restaurants and bars and brings basically a budget game and says to folks, "How should we spend the money?" I know Mayor Holt has a similar ethos. How do we engage the people in our community? The reason they feel empowered is because we empower them. And Mayor Menino was very much the same way. And the reason he got reelected 5 times wasn't because they knew him. It was because he knew them. He had his ear to their needs. He had his ear to their solutions. One reason that cities can be so effective is because they can be so proximate. But I just want to echo lastly one thing Mayor Holt said, which is this is not inexorable, inevitable, impermeable. This ethos of working together and getting work done is at risk these days, even in cities. And so we have to do all we can to try to ward that off, or we're going to find that in our cities, and we already are in some cases, finding that the same poison that's found its way in other places will find its way here.
Well, I was going to defer a discussion of the future until later, but we're here, and the future is right there in front of us. Mayor Holt, you alluded to this change and the risk. I think for a long time we thought that we were immune, that we had been inoculated, if you will, from this kind of spread. We said repeatedly, I said, other mayors said, there is no Democratic or Republican way to fill a pothole. There is no Democratic or Republican way to sweep the streets. And that carried us for a long time. Our local government here is nonpartisan. You're right. Most places in America, it has been, and I think will remain that way. That said, especially during this pandemic, there were signs here of some of this beginning to creep in. In Nashville, in part, I think the belief was that because our city council was at home, some in their pajamas, some on their exercise bikes, but they were in the comfort of a place, not together, but in some other place, that the tenor of the conversation, as well as some of the partisanship, began to creep in. Did you see any of that during the course of this particular challenge, and reflect, if you will, on Mitch's concern about the creeping nature of this problem?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm seeing it to some extent, and there are people that are watching cable news all day long, and they've now been fully trained that that's how politics works, and so they're growing increasingly uncomfortable with these pragmatic local politicians, and how dare they work with these evil people on the other side, and it's becoming, you're seeing more and more of that language. I think that what local officials have got to do is really own the system we have, really understand it. A lot of people maybe had just kind of haphazardly came into this life of public service at the local level, and don't necessarily have political science degrees, didn't think through these major differences that we know so instinctively. So we really have to help, I think, all local officials around the country understand, hey, why this is so different, why it is so much more effective, and now own it, defend it, talk about it, make no apologies for it. When people criticize you for, even when you're nonpartisan, it's like people know who's Republican and who's Democrat. So when people of your own party criticize you for working with someone, don't apologize. That's what's unfortunately become so common at the higher levels of government, is this idea that you should almost, you can't get caught working with the other side. We used to run campaigns. I'm not that old, but I remember in my adult life people running, campaign ads that said knows how to work across the aisle, knows how to get things done. That was not an uncommon slogan for members of Congress, but now it's been completely lost. Well, people at the local level really need to use that messaging, own it, and be proud of it. And I think if we kind of push back, I guess let's say, I guess what I'm saying is let's just not let this creep in and we sort of one day we wake up and it's gone. We've got to fight for this form of government and make sure that voters are going to the polls and saying, I'm voting for Mayor Holt because he works with everybody in this city. And he said that, and he's owning that, and he's saying that's the way it has to be. I hear these people saying he's not a good Republican. I don't care that he's doing exactly the right thing. That's what we need voters to be conscious of, and not let it be something sort of that we try to ignore and push away and hope that nobody talks about what a bad Republican I am. We got to own it. We got to say, no, I'm a good mayor, and I'm a good mayor for the city of Oklahoma City. And that's the kind of message that I think candidates for local office have got to stand on. If we're going to preserve what has been a wonderful track record, I think, for local government, even throughout all these crises we faced the last 2 years.
I agree. Mitch, you at an earlier time, more than a decade ago now, felt as though this notion of connecting local government with the people, local leaders with the people, was going to be significantly enhanced by technology and by entrepreneurship, quite frankly. And that's a large part, I think, of what you reflect on in your work, your written work, and your courses. Has that had the effect that you anticipated it would have, and is it part of the solution that Mayor Holt talks about?
I think inventiveness in government is absolutely part of the solution Mayor Holt is talking about. I think it's true that people act out their frustration these days in ways that are very dangerous because they've been trained in ways that are dangerous, to Mayor Holt's point. But I think we all recognize that people have bona fide frustrations and anxieties, and they're fearful about the future. And that's because many of the problems that face them haven't yet been addressed. However effective our cities have been, and they have been, they've left people feeling unprepared for the future of work. However strong our efforts have been at granting opportunity to all, they've left our cities, actually many of them, quite unequal. And so people are very frustrated with the status quo. And I do believe that inventiveness, that essentially possibility government, that trying new things that may only possibly work and probably won't, is going to be necessary to solve those stubborn, vexing problems. We will not, we can't just talk our way out of people's fear and anxiety and frustration with the status quo. We have to invent our way there. We have to do new things. Mayor Holt talked about how effective cities are, his city, other cities, actually getting work done. We have to use the methods adapted for us of entrepreneurship for trying new solutions to old problems. We cannot simply rest on the status quo. We have to recognize over and over again that the status quo may well be the risky choice. And I think the sooner that public leaders at the city level and all levels recognize that, and the earlier they invite their teams to try to arrive at new solutions with their publics, enlisting their publics and suggesting ideas and ultimately trying these ideas, the sooner we can get to solving the problems that have we've been stuck with so long and that are feeding this frustration. Yeah.
Well, Mitch, in the book, in We the Possibility, you wrote, and I'm quoting you now, government is better suited than any other entity in our society to take up and take on the risk of trying new things, close quote. I'm not sure that everyone at the Harvard Business School agrees with that particular position, that government is best or better suited than everyone else. But what makes you say that? And what gives us the assurance, frankly, that in a time when, from most, as Mayor Holt indicated, from the street level looking up at the rest of government, it's not apparent that it is best suited for that purpose?
Two things make me say it. First of all, our history. People say, oh, government can't invent new things. Wrong, just wrong. This country was invented, right? George Washington, in his first inaugural address, says this is an experiment, finally staked in the hands of the American people. For the first 5 presidents in their inaugural addresses, call this an experiment. Every apparatus of government we have these days was invented by somebody, oftentimes somebody here in this country. I mean, so the idea that government can't invent or try new things is just simply ahistorical. It's also wrong about the present, by the way. There are public inventors everywhere at all levels of government having success doing this. So I say that because it's a matter of historical fact. Government does invent things. It's been a great driver of invention and innovation over time. But also, it's as a matter of sort of political economy. Economists have won Nobel Prizes for pointing out that Ken Arrow, for example, that government is actually best suited to absorb and spread risk, that its scale and its size, its taxing authority, does actually grant it the ability to absorb risk that we can't leave on individuals. We should acknowledge that when government doesn't take up these risks of trying new things to keep people fed or keep them in their homes or prepare them for the future, those risks don't go away. Those risks don't go away. They just sit on the individual. And so government by its size, by its scale, is best suited for this. And local government, while it's not as big as federal government, can combine some of that size and scale, and then also that local ingenuity, that local creativity, all that energy that the mayor here and so many others try to tap into, and be inventive and try new things. And by the way, try them at scales small enough that if things go wrong, they can be corrected and fixed, and they're not catastrophic. So government is very well positioned for this if we tap back into our history, if we take up the lessons of our present, if we grant that America was founded by scientists and experimenters and tinkerers, they liked fixing things. We have to get back to doing that.
You know, Mayor, that the facts and the conclusions that Mitch just shared, and I think that he's right, and I've thought that for a long time. Again, are not necessarily commonly held thoughts. They are increasingly under attack. And you also referenced the importance of communication around the truths of what we are doing, what you are doing, and what is occurring at every level of government, but especially at the local level. When I left Boston, Tom Menino, according to the polling at that time, Menino was still mayor, and more than 60% of the people of Boston believed that they had met him personally and had a conversation with him. Now, I'm not sure. It's possible that they had, but more importantly, they believed that they had. They thought that they'd actually met their mayor and talked to him, and he'd listened. That is not an easy thing. I often think nowadays the hardest thing for a mayor, many elected officials, but especially mayors, is actually talking to everybody at the same time, having them listen and having them, if not agree, at least understand. I mean, how have you gone about that, and how do you communicate these things in a way that has allowed you to in your case, pass a nearly $1 billion plan, a tax increase, and a nearly $1 billion plan to address everything from civil rights to parks, mental health and addiction, sidewalks, streetcars, homelessness, all of it wrapped up. And 71.7% of the people of Oklahoma City said, that's what I want, and I'll pay for it. So how do you do that there and then across the board going forward?
Well, thanks for asking. And I think, what you're referencing, we call locally MAPS 4. And it's really a great, I think, case study in how to get things done in a very purplish city. And it involves all of those leadership lessons I think you just alluded to. I mean, first of all, obviously, in any case, you've got to be communicative with your residents. You've got to be transparent. In this regard, social media actually can be pretty valuable. It is almost surely a net negative on society, but it is an opportunity, if used properly by elected officials, to kind of continue a narrative every day that is bringing your residents along into what it is you're trying to accomplish. So let me dive in real quick, though, to MAPS 4, because I think it is a great story. In our city, we started passing these 1-cent temporary sales taxes called MAPs. It stands for Metropolitan Area Projects. The first one was passed in 1993. And traditionally, over the course of these 4 initiatives, they build things that are more quality of life related. I mean, it's not about street resurfacing or police stations or water pipes. I mean, it is not that type of core infrastructure. It's far more superficial than that in a sense. But we found in Oklahoma City in the 1980s and early 1990s that our lack of fun things to do, our lack of quality of life was really an existential crisis for our city. So MAPS 1 was a lot of downtown stuff. It was a sports arena and a canal through our entertainment district and a ballpark downtown. And it was all kind of, again, sort of quality of life, but things we actually really needed. And then MAPS 2 focused on the school buildings of our city. And then MAPS 3 kind of returned to the MAPS 1 model in 2009. My predecessor, Mayor Cornett, pushed that. And it had a convention center and a downtown park and a downtown streetcar. And then I came along and took office in 2018 and had the opportunity to put MAPS 4 before the voters. At this point in our city's life, it's expected, like a mayor is going to put forward a MAPS. And I looked at the lay of the land and felt that our voters were more interested in things outside of downtown. They were more interested now maybe in these sort of human needs that you were sort of alluding to when you rattled off a few of the projects: homelessness, mental health, domestic violence. And so what I started, I kicked off a full year before I knew we would have to have a vote. And by the way, in Oklahoma and in probably a lot of other states, this has to go to a vote of the people. This is not a council vote that can institute a tax. And so that's pretty important, and you've got to have people who understand politics involved in this if they're going to be successful. So I started a whole year out, launch video. We are gathering your ideas for Maps 4. We've got a website for it. Obviously, you can use social media as well. And we took, almost a year just pulling in all of those ideas and listening. And that's obviously critical. It's not rocket science. I don't think I'm breaking new ground there, but it is important to make sure you do that somewhere along the line and you give it plenty of time so that there's lots of room for it to breathe. Then we sort of narrowed it down to 16 projects, and we had 26 hours of council meetings. In our form of government, I chair the council meetings, so I'm there as well. And it was just a free-for-all. People coming in, making presentations on those 16 projects, but then literally anybody could come up to the microphone and speak for 3 minutes about that project and about their hopes and dreams for our city's future. It was inspirational. It was really a wonderful experience. This was in the summer of 19. And then finally, you got to put it together and make a package that in this case was about $1 billion. We were able to incorporate all 16 projects. And this is really, though, this is where I think that we did something that was experimental, at least in current American politics. I really worked hard to represent many different worldviews. I find that kind of right of center people, they're at a local level, they're willing to invest in economic development type projects. They're interested maybe in the Coliseum at the fairgrounds that allows us to attract horse shows. They're interested maybe in improvements at our arena, which allows us to retain our NBA team. They're more open to that. I mean, obviously there's people to the far right who don't like taxes at all, but I'm saying sort of those pro-business Republicans are into that, but maybe they're less into the homeless funding and the mental health stuff. And in a current American political spectrum, a lot of people in my position, it seems, at least at the highest levels in Washington, they would just pick one of those two sides, right? And they would say, okay, this side gets, this side is my 51% and it's going to get everything it wants. And I'm going to make sure that this other side doesn't get anything. In fact, if this other side says they wanted something I thought I wanted, I'm going to drop that like a hot potato because I don't want them to get anything. And I took a view of, I embrace pluralism. I embrace the idea that we can all kind of be happy, that we can all kind of get something that we want. And so I really, I was sort of the architect of this package, and I put it together in such a way that it would get 72%. That was the goal, and there's nothing wrong with that. And some people would say, it's like you're just trying to please everybody. And I said, exactly, that's what I'm supposed to do. And again, that was, to me, was running counter to current political trends in this country. But I wanted to have a package that nobody loved exclusively, except for maybe me. I liked all 16 projects. That's my job. But everybody else would have said, I don't really like 2 or 3 of these things, but these other 9 are really good. That's perfect, right? That's American democracy. That's compromise. That's you get most of what you want. You don't get everything you want. And that's what I ultimately felt that we had crafted here. And despite the success of Maps, and it has a pretty good national reputation, to remind you, it got 53% in its first iteration. And then more recently, and very telling of how difficult taxes can be, it only got 54% in 2009 under Mayor Cornett. I mean, this was like, he was able to ride over 20 years of success and the arrival of the NBA and all these validations about Maps. And yet we still had 46% of people drove themselves to the polls that day to vote against their city's future. So I knew that this was going to be hard. So getting 72% is no small feat. That by far blew away all the previous records. But it was because we embraced pluralism. It's because we embraced an outcome that was satisfactory to most people. And again, to state, in a city that's basically, probably voted 50-50 Trump Biden, we got 72%, which means that a lot of people who are Republicans voted the same way as a lot of Democrats that day. And that's the way it should be. So we're very proud of Maps 4. And one last point to Mitch's point about, he's basically reiterating that idea that cities and states can be the laboratories of democracy. We included in Maps 4 a very unique thing, and an endowment basically to help operate. Over $100 million of the $1 billion goes into managed endowments, which is one way to turn a short-term tax into a long-term revenue stream. And so we created these endowments that will help fund the operations of the MAPS projects and their maintenance. And that was a creative and clever way to try to deal with that dilemma of how do you operate these things when you're building them with a temporary tax. And I couldn't find really any other example. I've talked to Bloomberg people, I've talked to others. It's pretty unique, and we're proud of it. And the only reason I bring it up is because he made me think of the way that cities and states experiment and solve problems. And we absolutely are capable of doing that. And I hope that this is something that we'll be able to try again, and that other cities might find inspiration in as well. Thank you for that. I could go on all day about MAPS 4. We're very proud of it here, but it is an example. It's as much as it is a substantive benefit for all those causes that it serves, it is an experiment, I think, an example of how American democracy can still function and bring people together and create a consensus, even in a supposedly divided electorate.
Well, I served with Mayor Cornett. We were mayors together. There were a number of mayors that were mayors together with Mayor Cornett. But I'm wondering, were you his chief of staff in that when that MAPS vote was taken, that the one that got the lower numbers?
Yes, I was. And
well,
and it had funded opposition from the fire and police. That's a whole other thing, but that didn't help either. But yeah, no, I mean, I learned a lot from that experience as well. And that's another thing I hold up as important in public service is experience. And I'd had a lot of it. So, I'd had a front row seat to MAPS 3, and I think that helped me in MAPS 4.
Well, and you'd had, frankly, experience at the federal level as well, right? Both in the executive and in the legislative branches, and then in the legislature, something we also share. And something that I want to circle back to before our conversation here today ends. But the pandemic has had an effect on all of this, has tested lots of systems, not just our public health systems, but our systems of governance. And I noted two things about, and similar things about both of you. When this first occurred, and I think it was March of 2020, Mitch, you co-authored an op-ed for the Globe, as I recall, in which you talked directly about what Boston had done when the bombing had occurred, the marathon bombing, which was so tragic and so awful. And it was, I know, a risky thing to raise that specter, and you referenced that. But in essence, in your piece, you talked about how the mayor and the governor had together almost immediately and with the same voice at the same time said, you need to shelter in place. We're not passing a law. There's not an executive order. You need to shelter. These are the things you need to do, people of Boston, people of Massachusetts. You need to do them, and we want you to do them. And they did. And Mayor Holt, you did something very similar in real time when this pandemic came. And I think also unique. You reached out to the mayor of Tulsa. And you may do that all the time, but I can tell you the mayor of Memphis and the mayor of Nashville do not naturally get together. The mayor of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, the mayor of St. Louis and Kansas City, choose your state, choose your two big cities. It doesn't naturally often happen. You did that. And the two of you together said, this is what we're facing. This is what our cities are doing. I'd like you to each talk a little bit about your thinking about that sort of that shared message. And then I want to talk a little bit about how relationships with states have the turn that's taking now. Mitch, you might want to talk.
Well, I'd say two things briefly. The reason that people listen to the governor and the mayor when they asked them under no real power of law to stay home was because they trusted the mayor and the governor. And the reason they trusted the mayor and the governor go to two things we've been talking about already, which is one, there was a reputation for getting work done. And for being competent. And there was also a reputation for telling the truth. The problem about not telling the truth in politics is when you need people to believe you, they won't. And so when they said, we need you to stay home, these two leaders had, whatever you thought of their politics, had a reputation for being honest and candid. And so people listened. And so I think it's a case study in the importance of truth telling so that you can when you need it. But the other thing is, I think now here on, obviously many, many months into this pandemic, and I sort of think about also recalling the marathon bombings is in those crises, and that crisis for us and this long-standing crisis now for the world, people were more inventive. Mayors, governors, citizens had to leap to try new things. And the question for all of us now is whether we stay that way, or whether out of fear, anxiety, exhaustion, we go back to our old ways. And one of the reflections I had out of the marathon bombing was, okay, let's look back. We were acting on instinct and energy and adrenaline, but let's look back and see how we were inventive. Let's go back and see that we enlisted the community in ideas. Let's go back and see that we did try new things that hadn't been tried before. Let's go back and see that we realized at the end of the day, the way to make all this work was to bring people together. My deep hope is that as we go forward here, we will stay more inventive. And that the way we do that is by tapping into those things that we did over the last many months, that we reach out to outsiders for ideas, that we do try new things that haven't been tried before carefully, and that we do bring people together. If we can do those things, we can stay more inventive. We can solve the other problems that face us. Just to pile one tragedy on top of this giant pandemic tragedy would be to just waste all lessons that we've learned and then not use them to address the other problems that are at hand.
Well, Mayor Holt, I do want you to talk a little bit about the coming together with the mayor of Tulsa, because I think it was a piece of the incredible progress you made in real time, better than much in our region and much of the country in terms of reducing the spread. But I also would like you to use it as a way to tee up one more quick conversation I think we need to have. One of the other debates, parts of the debate that former Mayor Head and President Elliott had, was Mayor Head's belief in 1907 that the great challenge for cities in America, and the reason that people didn't want to be mayor in America at that time, was that state governments were reaching down and removing authority from local governments and intervening, that the preemption that was prevalent at that time, more than 100 years ago, would keep cities from being successful and hold mayors back. So if you could, in that context, talk both about the way in which you worked with Tulsa and brought that mayoral approach, and then also reflect, if you can, on any concerns you may have as a former state leader and a leader in your state on that challenge that Mayor Head so much worried about a century ago.
Sure. Well, yes. So in Oklahoma, we have really two large cities. The third largest city it's a far drop down. I mean, so it really is defined by Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And the pandemic was a unique exercise in persuasion. You know, a lot of people get too fixated on the words that mayors and governors were writing on parchments, you know, and as if we could enforce any of that. You know, those proclamations and those ordinances were often tools of persuasion. They were part of the effort to create norms, but there was really no way to force people to stay in their house or force people to wear masks. I mean, all of these things were so individualized that they were largely unenforceable. And so you had to have credibility, and you had to have trust, as Mitch said, and you had to have all the pieces in place to persuade people. Well, I think what Mayor Bynum of Tulsa and I realized immediately was we will have a hard time persuading our own residents to stay home or to wear masks if people 90 minutes up the turnpike are not doing that. You know, we're in the same state, we're 90 miles apart, we have a lot of the same culture, we have a lot of people who move in and back and forth between the two cities. I mean, you wouldn't call us the Twin Cities, but we almost are. You know, we're pretty close together. And so we recognized that we needed to kind of move in concert just to preserve the credibility of these things we were asking our residents to do. And so we also had to work with a multitude of suburban mayors and council members in our communities too, because you know, in both cases, we're probably only really the mayor of about half of our metropolitan residents. So we worked together, and then separately we would work with our own suburban communities, and through that we were able to basically be on the same page through March, April, and May of 2020. And to the point where Mayor Bynum and I would announce the same things at the same day, at the same hour, you know, just to keep it, in line. I mean, obviously, if we had been in a state where the governor had been doing those types of measures on a regular basis, we wouldn't have had to do that. But he was occasionally involved, occasionally not. And when in those periods when we felt like we had to move and he was not willing to do that, then we filled in that void. So yeah, it was a great exercise, and definitely I think important to the outcomes that we reached. And actually Oklahoma City, I'm not sure Tulsa's data, but in Oklahoma City, We have a significantly lower per capita death rate than the rest of our own state, right? And so and we're obviously the most densely populated area. So, I think that's even doubly more impressive. Now, to your question about state intervention on any number of things, but the pandemic is one example that happened across the country. I certainly will credit the governor and legislative leaders here in Oklahoma for never doing that, despite lots of people in their caucuses that would have loved to have done that. It amazed me still that there are people who live 300 miles from Oklahoma City who just can't sleep at night knowing that Oklahoma City has a mask ordinance, and they want to do something. They want to make sure the legislature passes a law that prohibits that. But that never happened here. We never got those powers taken away from us. We always had the ability to do what we needed to do, and I appreciate that. Having said that, there are other areas through the years that the Oklahoma legislature has certainly tried to preempt city powers, and that happens all across the country. And it is a damn shame because obviously, as we have talked about here, cities are the most functional and effective form of government that we've had over the last quarter century in this country. And it's just unbelievable that anybody would want to try to debilitate that. But it does happen, and we just got to keep being a voice against that. But it's a constant struggle in states across the nation.
Well, Mayor, I can't tell to look at you, but I know that chronologically you are older than you were when you were the youngest mayor. But I believe that you are going to run again and continue this work at the local level. Do I have that right?
That is right. My election's actually in 3.5 months, and it looks okay. But I've got a far right person. But again, I'm so blessed, I feel, to run in a nonpartisan form of government. I have major support from Democrats. I have major support from Republicans, and I have to let the communists and the QAnoners go. I can't get 100%. But I feel like we're tracking right along with that 70% of normal, reasonable people in the middle who just want to get things done and have been kind of our base in Oklahoma City for many years now.
Well, congratulations on that, and you certainly have my best wishes for the election ahead. I want to just quickly say, Mitch, at the eulogy that you gave for Tom Menino, you were, as was publicly reported, incredibly moving, pitch perfect for our friend. But I want to say that at that time, all of Boston speculated that you were now beginning your own career in public office. I think Shirley wrote a column, in fact, about that. And you were quoted as saying, and Mayor, you just need to hear these words because you've heard politicians say something like this. This is Mitch Weiss saying, quote, "I'm not angling to run for public office," period, close quote. What does that mean, Mitch?
It means the same thing now as it did then. I'm not angling for public office. I have a lot of admiration for Mayor Purcell, what you did in Nashville, for Mayor Holt. He's been such an important voice today for mayors and bringing people together, and I'm inspired by that. It's not the job I seek. I was happy to be a chief of staff. I'm happy to help mayors around the country try to become more inventive, and that's where I spend all my time these days. If I can bring about possibility government in more places by some little dint of contribution that doesn't involve holding elected office, I'll feel very proud. My son asked me the other day, "Daddy, if government gets any better, will you take any credit?" And I thought about it for a minute and said, sure, if government gets better, I'll take a little bit of credit, but we all have to do the work, and there's many ways to do it. And I'm happy for all of us to find our own way in our democracy to contribute. And I wish Mayor Holt and you and other elected and former elected officials good luck, but there's so many other ways to be an active citizen, and I'm enjoying those ways.
Okay, and one of them is Over His Shoulder. I'll remind you that We the Possibility is available now at your bookstore or online. And also that Mayor Holt actually wrote a rather well-regarded book on the subject of professional sports coming to your city, for those that are interested in that. For all of these reasons, I'm very thankful that you were both able to join us today. I know certainly I could hear from you now for another hour, but we don't have that time. We have to say simply that we're thankful and appreciative, and we look forward to success at the local level because of people like you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Great conversation. Enjoyed it very much.
Take care.